Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Dawn Boylan from Alliant, and I'm delighted to be here today and to have the opportunity to welcome you to today's Ethics in Business presentation on behalf of the collaborating partners. The Canadian Centre for Ethics and Public Affairs, CCEPA, which is a joint initiative between St. Mary's University and the Atlantic School of Theology, and also Imagine Canada, a national charitable organization that looks into and out for Canada's charities and not-for-profit organizations. Imagine Canada delivers research and influences public policy and builds support for charities and nonprofits and encourages collaboration and engagement from business. We are very pleased here today to have Dr. Michael Hall. Dr. Hall is Vice President of Research at Imagine Canada, and he'll be talking about the business of giving, investing in your community and investing in your values. Dr. Hall is going to provide us with highlights of the recently released Canadian Survey of Business Contributions to Community, detailing how corporations have moved beyond checkbook philanthropy. And I can tell you at Alliant, since 2004, we redesigned our community investment program to do just that, moving our program from the margins of our business to the mainstream. We know we have a responsibility to share information about our community program with our employees, with our customers, with our unit holders, and with the general public. We want to demonstrate how Alliance contributions are making a difference. We were also honored and delighted back in 2006 to host a roundtable discussion for Imagine Canada with community investment colleagues from across the region. Our input contributed to the overall first phase of this study, and I personally want to thank Dr. Hall for coming back to Halifax and sharing these results with us personally. After Michael's presentation, which is about 40 minutes, we are going to give the audience an opportunity to ask questions. And at the end of the room, you'll see a microphone that we would ask that you pick up to be able to ask the questions. But just before we get started, I'd like to draw your attention as well to the evaluation sheet you'll find at your table. CCEPA values your input, and we'd ask that you take a few moments at the end of the session to give us your feedback. And if you'd like more information about CCEPA and the sessions that they're running this fall, you'll also find more information at the table just outside the door. So thank you for listening, and now please join me in warmly welcoming Dr. Michael Hall.
Well, good afternoon, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here today to talk about the role that Canadian businesses are playing in supporting communities across this country. We've embarked on a long-term program of research. One of the stops on our way was an early visit to Halifax, as Don mentioned, to talk to business leaders in this community about the sorts of things they were doing to support charities and nonprofits in their organizations. I'm really pleased to be able to come back and follow up on that initial chat to present some of the findings and some of the outcomes of our work. I want to share with you today some good news about what businesses are doing in Canada. And I also want to share with you some of the things that I'm worrying about as we enter into what are pretty turbulent economic times. But before I do that, I'd like to put some context about the research to you. I'd like to talk first about what charities are doing in this country and about what some of the challenges they are facing are, so that you have a bit of a sense of how important it is that businesses, as well as individual Canadians, continue to support these important organizations in our country. Our charities and nonprofit organizations are really the anchors of our community. They're often taken for granted, they're often invisible, but they're providing the services that we all come to rely on, from social services for youth and seniors to recreational opportunities to participate in arts and culture, providing training, housing and shelter, and providing vehicles for addressing social and economic issues of concern to all of us. The list of what they do is pretty much endless. Their work is often invisible and taken for granted, as I mentioned, and that's why events like today are so important and, in my view, so timely. Well, These organizations are working in areas all over the country, but what do they have in common? Well, they have in common a few things. First of all, they share a common orientation to pursue social and collective goals. They're working together to make a difference in communities, and they have a common advantage over businesses and government. They're able to marshal, to rely, to benefit from the contributions of time and money from individual Canadians and from businesses as well. Over 90% of Canadians give money over the course of a year, about 40% volunteer. And if you add all that up, it exceeds about 500,000 jobs, if you added it up in terms of full-time equivalents. That's more than the labor force of Nova Scotia, more than the labor force of most provinces in the country. That's an incredible asset. And one of the great strengths of these organizations and the value they offer is they provide a vehicle for Canadians to engage in autonomous action, to get in and tackle issues that government often doesn't or won't, and to tackle issues that businesses aren't, because that's not their main focus. So we see that nonprofits were the first to tackle the issue of AIDS, first to bring it to public attention, the first to put breast cancer on the public agenda. When there's a disaster, the first place Canadians turn to are our nonprofits and charities. And they work in a host of ways. Their ability to act independently of government and to work quickly means they often come up with innovative solutions to problems. So when there's hunger in our community, nonprofits came up with the ideas of food banks. When people needed shelter, the idea of Habitat for Humanity emerges. And when the environment became an issue, Greenpeace was created to advocate for changes in those areas. And those are just a few that spring to mind. Many Canadians, I'm sure maybe you as well, would be astonished to know that we have the second largest nonprofit sector in the world, if you look at it in terms of the amount of the labor force that's engaged. The second largest. Second only to the Dutch. I don't know what the Dutch are doing, but we are far outdistanced the American nonprofit sector. We far outdistance that in the UK. We are far ahead of France and Germany and all of the European countries with the exception of the Netherlands. So we have this second largest nonprofit sector in the world, but it differs more than just in size. It's decidedly more service-oriented, working more in the areas of health, social services, and education than are the sectors in other provinces. And it's more professionalized. That is to say, although we have a lot of volunteers, there are more professional staff in Canadian charities and nonprofits than other places. It's really a reflection of who we are and what our priorities are as a nation. And it's a bit, it reflects the Canadian way. In Europe, there's a tradition of big state involvement in providing services to citizens. So big state delivers human, social services, and education. In the U.S., it's a tradition of the market economy provides most of the services. In Canada, we took the middle way, and that is we rely on charities and nonprofits to deliver our services, often with government funding, but always with individual Canadians in charge of these organizations as volunteers on their boards. Now, I would argue, and I'm not entirely objective about this, that our nonprofit sector is one of our greatest achievements as a country. But it may come as no surprise if I tell you it's the second largest in the world, but most of these organizations are small. If you go around your community and if you're active, these are small organizations. Half of them run entirely on volunteers and have revenues of less than $100,000 a year. And those small organizations are the ones that rely most on donations. But a third of all their revenues come from donations from individual Canadians. They're small organizations. They don't have a lot of resources in their budgets. They've got loads of expertise, and the challenge is how to get that expertise into action in communities. And that's why business support is so critical, because charities today are being squeezed on all fronts. Historically, a significant portion of support for charities and nonprofits has come from government. This goes back to colonial times when, in many times, governments were funding churches to deliver education and social services. So we had this historical reliance on government to support a lot of our funding. And then in the 1990s, we saw the biggest downsizing of government in our history since the demobilization after World War II. A 20% cut in spending across government at all levels. And the effects of that, even though it happened in the 90s, are still reverberating today in our charitable and nonprofit sector. Ladies and gentlemen, the needs in our community didn't go away when government downsized. And I'm sure most of you will agree that the needs have probably increased. And where do we turn? Well, we turn to charities and we turn to nonprofit organizations to meet those needs. And we expect them, we don't really know this, but we are really expecting them to cover the costs that government no longer supports. And so they're scrambling for resources to fill in the gap and provide service for the increasing needs in their community. And for that, they turn to individual Canadians and they turn to businesses. We often hear from individual Canadians that there's so many fundraising requests. What's happening? And businesses, you'll see in our study, said the same thing, that there are too many charities seeking funding for the same causes. And people say to me, what's wrong with charities? There's too many of them out there all doing the same thing. We should put them all together and, make them more rational. Well, my response to that is it's not that there's too many charities. There's too many needs in our community that aren't being met. And, it's a bit ludicrous to expect everybody to come together under one umbrella. We don't expect all the coffee shops in the city to merge. So we get all of our coffee from whichever one we want, Tim's or Starbucks. But somehow we think that there's some inefficiency in the charitable sector. Well, it isn't. It's innovation. It's people. It's collective activity in our communities. It's people coming together and saying, we see a problem and we're going to do something about it. So we need to respond to those needs in our community and the needs for our charities and nonprofits for support. And the extent to which Canadians and Canadian businesses have done that is actually quite impressive. But there are storm clouds on the horizon. The bad weather's coming, as you know, and you're hearing if you read the news. And if all accounts are correct, we haven't seen anything yet. From 1995 to 2005, the average growth in donations was 7% a year. That's a 70% increase over 10 years. Charities have come to rely on that, by the way, that increasing donations, and it's a function of them being more and more proactive about getting money in the face of declining resources from particularly government. Well, last week StatsCan released the 2006 data, and the dollars, because it's always behind. It's a government agency. It's a little bit behind. I'm a big fan of Statistics Canada. I don't want anything on the public record saying I'm not. I'll just say why. We have one of the few things in the developed world. We have a regular series of surveys on giving and volunteering that Statistics Canada does. So we are able to have some intelligence about what's happening in our communities. So last year, StatsCan released the 2006 data. In the previous 10 years, we'd seen 7% growth. Last year, 1.4%. That's not even keeping pace with inflation. So that's troubling. But also troubling is there was, for the second year in a row, a decline in the number of donors giving. It was 1% this year and 1.4% the previous year. This is a long-term trend we've seen. Average gifts historically have been going up, but the number of Canadians giving is shrinking. Modestly, but steadily. And if you compare the numbers who were giving in the 90s to those who are giving now, they're much less. In short, fewer people are making larger gifts. One of the incentives that was fueling some of these larger gifts was a measure called the elimination of capital gains on gifts of securities. So high net wealth donors could give stocks or property that they had accumulated and not pay capital gains taxes. It was a temporary measure and increased over a few years, was made permanent last year. So the capital gains exemption fueled a lot of those high-end gifts. Well, ladies and gentlemen, there aren't capital gains to be had this year. And if there are, I'd like to talk to you and find out who your investment advisor is. There are no capital gains. Sagging markets have left potential donors on the sidelines, and we're hearing anecdotal reports of donors walking away from pledges or trying to renegotiate their pledges for different times when the markets are better. there's less, there's just less wealth in this country than there was the previous year, and that spells trouble for us all. The markets have an impact on charities directly. They have their own endowments if they're large enough, and those have taken a hit. Foundation endowments who grant, they've taken major hits in their giving, some reporting losses of 10 to 15%. The Vancouver Foundation, one of the largest community foundation in the country, usually gives about $40 million a year to charities and nonprofits in Vancouver and the BC area. Well, it's going to have $10 million to $15 million less to give this year. So donors are squeezed, foundations are squeezed, the charities are squeezed, and governments are all seriously looking at how to cut back spending, and charities rely significantly on government money, so they'll probably get hit there too. This is sounding pretty gloomy, right? All the while, there is still an increased demand for services, and as I'll talk about later, that's the biggest challenge that businesses tell us they're facing. So we all need to consider how we're going to pull together to address these challenges. They're too big for government alone. They're too big for charities and nonprofits alone. They're too big for businesses alone. But I think the solution relies on us coming together to try to address this. One is to dig deep and help out. And the other is to look at new ways of supporting and think of, are there other things that we can do to help and support charities and nonprofits in our communities? And as I'll show you in our study today, businesses, the leading businesses in the country, seem to be leading the way in that regard. So let me turn to our. That's a nice slide. Let me turn to our study. This is a multi-year initiative. It's funded by Encana Corporation, who gave us a grant for this research. We started in the fall of 2006 with a set of consultations, one of which was here in Halifax, and talked to community investment professionals about the sorts of challenges they were facing, their practices, what they were doing. Some of their quotes are on the screen in front of you. We took that information and followed it up with the largest and most comprehensive survey of businesses and their community contributions that we know of, with the exception of one study in Australia, and a targeted sample study of 93 of the largest corporations in the country, those who have revenues of over $25 million. And the report today is going to focus on the large companies. And as you'll see, there's a lot of interesting things happening out there. Our leading companies in many ways, our large corporations are in many ways setting examples and leading the way for us. But there's probably room for everybody to do a little bit more in the business community. One of the first things that was really surprising to us was that there are very positive attitudes about charities and nonprofits among large corporations. They're positive among the broad business community, which is that chart on your right. 52% of all businesses that we sampled think that charities agree strongly that charities and nonprofits generally improve the quality of life in Canada. But 72% of respondents from our large corporations believe so. That's much larger than the all-business community. It's larger than the general public. So the people who are thinking about this in our large corporations really understand the value of charities in the country. They're also much more likely than those in the broader community to understand the benefits of collaboration and working together to deliver benefits. Again, 71% of our large business sample agreeing with that statement. But it's not all about getting benefits. Philanthropy still exists. These not as strongly endorsed as our other statements, but 25% of the respondents in our study strongly agree that most businesses that donate to charity would do so even if they didn't get business benefits in return. If you count up those who agree somewhat and strongly, we're close to 80%. So, and this is a theme we'll see throughout our findings. Businesses are looking for benefits, but they're also working from a spirit of philanthropy. Both of these motivations are at play, which isn't terribly surprising. Most Canadians give and volunteer, and they take those values with them into their workplace. What are businesses doing? We're breaking down our results into two types of contributions. One are the direct contributions that businesses give, just directly write a check, give something to somebody, to an organization. And then there's a second set of activities which involve businesses mobilizing the resources that others have. So I want to focus first on the direct contributions. Almost all of our the broad business community, our all business sample, almost all of them donate money. 50% give goods and services. 50% give goods. About 40% donate services. And then sponsorship, cause marketing, donating to a foundation, that tails off. But look at what the large corporations are doing. They're doing much more of everything. Virtually all of them give money. 72% donate goods and products. Almost 70% donate services. 59% are engaged in sponsorships. Cause marketing, 26%. And then corporate foundations, 17%. So while our broad business community are giving, they're focusing in a few areas. Our large corporations are giving much more frequently, and they're relying on strategies that might be return a benefit. Sponsorships and cause marketing, for example, are areas where you have an opportunity for a business to not only give, but also to promote its own, promote the company. If you add up the donations of goods, services, and money, it's about $340 million. Most of that is donations as opposed to sponsorship and cause marketing. About 64 million is sponsorship and cause marketing, the red slice, small slice. If you look at the donations, about 2/3 of that is cash and about 1/3 is non-cash, so gifts of goods, products, or in-kind services. And this is just for our 93 companies that we've sampled. This isn't an estimate of all corporate giving in Canada. In terms of the amounts, you see that for our broad business sample, the total median contribution is $3,000. That means that half of all businesses give $3,000 or more, half give $3,000 or less. The large corporation amounts, dramatically bigger. That's not that interesting to us. We expect that. They have dramatically bigger budgets. What is interesting is how much businesses are giving based on the resources they have at their disposal. And so for that, we look at the percentage of donations as a percentage of pre-tax profit. Our broader business community seems to be doing a better job. Half of them are giving 1.25% of their pre-tax profits. Our 93 large corporations, half of them are giving 1% or more. For us, that's encouraging. This is a standard we set at Imagine Canada over 20 years ago for corporate giving, that businesses should give 1% of their pre-tax profits to charities. This tells us that half or more are doing that. What's troubling to us, and by the way, if you look internationally, there's two studies in the U.S. that are comparable, one that puts that number at 0.88% and another that puts it at 1.16. So we're in the ballpark. These are comparing median values of percentage of pre-tax profit. We're in the ballpark. What's less encouraging is the fact that 25% are giving 0.06% of their pre-tax profits. That's not a lot. And we think there's room to do more. And we would encourage, and we are encouraging, those businesses to look at what their peers and competitors are doing. They're giving a lot more, and as I'll show you in our findings, they believe there's benefits to their business from their activity, and they may, and this is one of our arguments, they may have competitive advantages over those who are not. Not to say, in addition to the fact that it's a good thing to do. So we think there's room for improvement. Where does the money go? Our all business sample really clusters its giving around four main causes: social services, health, sports and recreation, and hospitals. And then it tails off after that. Our large corporations, just like the previous slide, give much more frequently to a variety of causes. Now, this is just the number of percentage that are supporting. This isn't the dollar value. I'll show you the dollar value in a minute. So 90% are giving to social services, 82% to health, 75% to sports and recreation, 74% to hospitals. Big differences in the extent to which large corporations support arts and culture versus our broader business community, or the United Way, universities and colleges, and environmental aid. So a very different pattern for the large corporations now. First of all, they're spreading their giving around. They're supporting a lot more causes in terms of their relationships, and they're more likely to do so. But although large corporations have many more relationships, partly because, I presume, because they have more resources to establish those relationships, they still concentrate their money on a few causes. So this is where the total dollar value of corporate contributions from our large business sample are going. Most of it's going to social services, health, arts and culture, and universities and colleges. And if you put the United Way 10% in with the 19% for social services, because that's really what United Ways are, many of the causes they're supporting, you see that social services really does start to predominate. We think there's some advantages here for businesses to think about whether they could spread their support around. If all corporations are giving to the same causes, it's very tough for businesses to distinguish themselves from others. And when we talked in our qualitative work, talked with businesses, many of us told us they were looking for a unique niche. They want to establish a partnership with a charity that lines up with their business, but that also helps them stand apart from other businesses. Well, we think that this is the second largest nonprofit sector in the world, 161,000 charities and nonprofit organizations. It looks to us like there's opportunities for corporations to find other causes to support, maybe up-and-coming causes that have yet to have been established that will give them a unique niche in their community investment environment. So that's the direct contributions, what businesses are doing on a one-to-one basis with charities and nonprofits. The other type of contribution is to mobilize the support or facilitate the support of others. This could be raising money from employees or providing payroll deductions, supporting employee volunteering, matching grants, raising money from clients and customers. If we look at the all business sample, the blue bars in front of you, you can see the main thing that they're doing in this mobilizing aspect is encouraging or supporting volunteering, 43%. This is the most frequent activity there is flexibility with work hours. But the large corporate sample has really figured this out. And they seem to be mobilizing the whole range of resources that they have at their disposal. 83% raising money from employees, 71% providing a payroll deduction, and at the bottom, 50% raising money from customers or suppliers. Why are organizations doing this? Why do businesses support community? Well, first of all, it's clear that businesses see that there is a business benefit. We heard this when we talked to our community investment people in our qualitative work, and this is coming through very strongly in our survey. And we're just focusing on large corporation motivations at the moment. The number one reason, three of them, helps to build a strong and healthy community, which is good for business. That's the missing ... good for business. It's good for a company's relationship with the community. And this is often described in the literature as getting a social license to operate. It's about developing goodwill and credit in a community so that if business struggles, for example, a food manufacturer has to recall food. It's been in the news recently. Having a reputation for being concerned and involved in community helps buffer those kinds of negative reputational, the negative reputational risks of those activities. Fitting company traditions and values doesn't really fit here, but we heard it in our community, in our consultations. And this really reflects the fact that for many businesses, there's a long history of supporting charities and nonprofits. This isn't new. It just didn't arrive in 2000 or in the 1990s. Many companies, our oldest companies, have been involved in this for a long time. And when we spoke to people, they said, this is what our company is about. This is our sense of who we are. 51% say it's a very important reason is it's good for their reputation. But philanthropy is still alive. 51% say it's a good thing to do. A very important reason for their giving is because it's a good thing to do irrespective of returns. And this is the sense when we talk to people. There is a philanthropic spirit. But on top of that, people are saying, look, in addition to that, is there something else we can get here? Is there a business benefit? We have to explain if it's a public company. We have to explain why we're doing it to our shareholders. And so there's been a lot of focus on trying to understand the possible business benefits or the win-win partnership out of this activity. 45% say a very important reason is it's good for relationship with customers or clients. And 28% about focus on recruiting and retaining employees. Now, I thought when I started this that giving money away must be the easiest job in the world. I've learned otherwise. There's a lot of challenges to this. And when we talk to our participants in our consultations, the first thing we heard was it was all about demand. Everywhere they go, they're being asked to support a cause. As you saw in one of the quotes at the start, the size of the requests are increasing. We heard anecdotally the other day about someone a charity who had made a request and at a certain level, and when the business partner didn't want to give that level, they thought that was a bit outrageous. Well, it's outrageous because they're facing huge challenges. On the business side, it's how to say no. You're constantly having to say no, and even to cope with the demand of processing requests. So the number one challenge for our all business sample is difficulty responding to increasing requests. And it's the same, not quite as high, but close to the same for our large corporate sample. For all businesses, they struggle a little bit more with lack of resources. They're smaller, they have less resources, not only money and goods to give away, but also people to dedicate to community investment activities. Large corporations are struggling with how to measure the impact of their business contributions. And that's because they're trying to find business benefits. They're being besieged with requests, and at the same time, they're struggling with how to come up with methodologies to show how that can be done. And we heard time and again, if only we could have, is there a toolkit out there or something that will help us with this? I don't think there's an easy answer to that problem, by the way, because we heard in our conversations that many businesses have trouble even tracking the amount of giving that's going on, let alone what impact it's having. If you're a large business with many sites, for example, a retail chain, you can be sure that there is giving happening at most of your store sites because each of those store sites are going to be approached by a charity or a nonprofit asking for support. And the employees in that operation may have their own interests. Head office may be trying to set up a set of relationships with others. And the marketing department is giving sponsorships or cause marketing. The community investment is giving donations. It's a little tougher to track than you might think. And if you can't track even the dollars going out, difficulty measuring the impact is going to be even larger. Difficulty managing the expectations of multiple stakeholders. I mentioned we have employees who may want one thing. You may have a site in a small town, and what your employees are interested in is building a hockey rink, which might not lie with the interest of a large pharmaceutical company based in a major city. So the board may have different interests than senior management. The employees, again, and then your clients and customers may have a different set of expectations. So when a business is trying to be strategic about this, it becomes stakeholder management issues. What we're really encouraged by is what's not an issue. And what's not an issue? Lack of interest. Lack of interest from employees, that's not a problem. Lack of interest from management, that's not a problem. For us, that's very encouraging because that means we don't have to sell the value of this. We just have to figure ways for businesses to do it better and with more impact. When you look at what our all business sample is doing, the broad business community, they're not particularly well organized about their giving. Our sense is that it's mostly reactive. They get asked, they make a decision, they give. Only 22% have a program for their sponsorship or for their community investment. Less than half have involvement as senior management or the board. Very few are measuring their benefits, and only 8% have a written policy. Our large corporations are leading the way in terms of getting organized. 79% have regular ongoing programs. Most of them have two-thirds have senior management involvement or board involvement in leading the programs. Fewer are measuring the benefits, and that's, from our qualitative work, that's probably not a reflection of lack of interest. It's a reflection of difficulty trying to figure out how to do that particular piece. And 39% have a written policy, which is a bit low for our, we were a bit surprised by that, but that probably reflects what the 1%, those who give 1% of profits are doing. And we've got that group that are giving 0.06%, and we suspect they haven't taken those efforts to organize, develop policies. Well, it's been a very quick run through this data. After lunch and throw up endless PowerPoint slides. Here's the main findings, just to remind you. So first of all, most businesses support charities and nonprofits. That could be surprising if you have a cynical view about business, but if you understand the extent to which individual Canadians support charities and nonprofits and volunteer in their communities and that recognize they don't check their values at the door, maybe it makes a lot of sense. But most businesses are not doing it in a particularly proactive way from our point of view. And large corporations are leading the way in showing how that can be done. They've identified that there are benefits that can be obtained in addition to doing good. And from my perspective, I think that's fine. I'm not concerned terribly if businesses win out of a community investment. In fact, I think that's all to the good. What we need to be looking for in our communities, as I've said in the beginning, is the win-win partnerships, rather than expecting each to get sort of one-sided gains. Large corporations are giving more contributions of all kinds. The direct contributions are much more, they use a wider array of direct contributions. They're using sponsorship and cause marketing. They're more likely to donate services and goods. They're much more engaged in mobilizing their clients and their employees, their customers in fundraising and employee volunteering. They figured out that they have a range of resources that they can bring to bear that can make a difference in community. We did a study in 2004 about the capacity challenges nonprofits were facing. The biggest challenge that came up? Volunteers. Why? Half of the sector has no paid staff, just volunteers. So efforts by businesses to free up their staff to volunteer can have a huge impact. One of the lessons we also see from this is that large corporations have figured out a way to add value, make an impact, without incurring a lot of extra cost. Direct contributions of cash come right from the bottom line. But there's a lot of things that can be done that will have an impact that won't necessarily have the same cost structure. And finally, they're more organized and they're more strategic. They're thinking about what they do. They've created, many have created policies. They certainly have programs, and they have their senior management or their board engaged in those programs. We do think, however, that there are ways for businesses to create greater impact. First of all, develop a strategy. Significant numbers of large corporations understand there's benefits to be had. And as I mentioned before, those who are not giving, those who are giving less than 0.06%, are probably missing a competitive advantage in their business. And it doesn't take much to start to get strategic. First of all, to look at all of the assets that can be brought to bear in your relationship as a business with community organizations, and think about deploying them. And they're really it's about networks. It's about deploying your employees. It's about deploying your customers and your clients, and trying to make sure that there are a variety of resources. One of the things which I didn't show you as our slide is the possibility for businesses to orient their purchasing policies to support charities and nonprofits. About 20% of businesses do so. That's a fairly low-cost strategy, but 46% of the revenues to charities actually comes from them finding ways to sell goods and services. So there is a match also there. So deploying all available assets. Businesses, there are all sorts of places in the second largest nonprofit sector in the world to form relationships, and we would encourage businesses to look beyond the standard 4 causes that they've been traditionally supporting. Not to say those causes aren't important. And get organized and communicate. And the easiest, simplest thing that businesses can do to help out in this area is to develop a policy and communicate the policy to the community. Because all over this country, there are charities looking for support, writing proposals, and sending them off blindly to the dark to a business, hoping that they will like their cause. They have no way of knowing whether the business is supporting that cause or not, because many businesses, as our research shows, haven't developed a policy. Businesses, on the other hand, say we're being overwhelmed with demand. Why are all these charities and nonprofits knocking on our doors? Well, they're knocking on your doors because they're hoping that maybe you'll support them. But if you would target your support, you have two possibilities. One, you should reduce demand because charities will stop knocking on businesses' doors, and you'll help them by making sure they're not wasting their effort. And thirdly, for businesses to get organized, they can improve their impact because of all those assets that they have. Just think what they could do if they marshaled them all, focused them all on a single cause. That would be much more effective than what is the case in many businesses. There's a lot of small gifts based on people asking for support. So we think without a lot of work, businesses can make a big difference. And then lastly, I would hope that we try to measure the impact to target efforts better. And I would encourage businesses not to be totally overwhelmed with this task. It looks at first complicated, but you can do it in small steps. The first step would be to just interview people in your business and in your community, your partners, and find out how things are working. Actually, the very first step is set goals and objectives, which is actually probably the biggest thing that any business could do. And secondly, start with small steps, and it doesn't have to be complicated measurement to start this process. I want to close with a quote from one of our participants. You know, as I've said, the challenges that we face across the country really can't be met by businesses alone, nor by charities and nonprofits themselves. They do require all of us, individual businesses and government, working together. Our research shows that many businesses are rising to the challenge, and we hope that they're setting the examples for others to follow. So thank you.
Hello, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Valerie Payne. I'm a board member of the Canadian Centre for Ethics and Public Affairs, and it's my great pleasure to thank Dr. Michael Hall on your behalf today. Michael, really enjoyed your presentation. You know, we as Canadians often wonder what is it that makes us different than our neighbours to the south. Well, I think we've got a pretty good idea from the charitable and not-for-profit side today, which is really, I didn't know that. That was really quite an interesting statistic that you showed us. Also, the amount of employment that's involved in the not-for-profit sector is really quite amazing when you think about the equivalent of 500,000 jobs from the volunteer sector, but also that, did I hear right when you said there's 161,000 charities or not-for-profits in our country?
Correct.
That's really quite staggering when you think about it, and the work that they do and how they contribute to the fabric of our communities and what makes us Canadian. So on behalf of CCEPA, as we call ourselves, I'd like to thank you for your presentation today. We have a small token for you, which I'm assured is under here. Oh, here it is. Here it is here. So thank you so much.
Thank you very much.
Really enjoyed it.
My pleasure.
Thank you.